Welcome to Context. I'm Brad Harris. If you like what I'm up to, please leave a 5-star review wherever you listen, and consider signing up to support the show as a paying member on patreon.com/Brad Cole Harris or through Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Supporters get access to lots of additional episodes and help keep Context ad-free. Thank you so much to those of you who've already taken that step. I hope you love today's episode. If you've ever owned a home, you know a truth that rarely makes it into environmental debates. Life never stops pushing back. Skip mowing the lawn for a month and weeds take over. Miss a round of pest control and ants colonize the kitchen, or raccoons find a vent and take up residence in your attic. Forget to service a dehumidifier, and mold mushrooms overnight in the crawl space. Vines test every fence line, trees push roots through every pipe, spiders weave webs in every unattended corner. Homeownership is not just shelter, it's a low-intensity war with life itself. And it's big business. Americans spend over $100 billion every year on lawn care and landscaping alone, just to keep grass, weeds, and trees in check. Add another $20 billion for pest control, from termites to rodents to mosquitoes. The roofing industry, much of it dedicated to keeping moisture, mold, and nesting animals out, runs another $60 billion annually. Throw in gutter cleaning, HVAC sealing, drain clearing, foundation repair. The numbers climb higher. Collectively, homeowners in the United States spend several $100 billion every year just maintaining the fragile line between civilized space and the encroachment of life. And that's only at the scale of the individual home. Cities are engaged in the same struggle at industrial scale. New York spends millions annually just combating rats. Chicago applies tens of thousands of gallons of herbicides to keep sidewalks and medians clear. Airports deploy falconers and elaborate netting to keep birds from nesting in hangars or colliding with planes. Every skyscraper installs spikes or wires to keep pigeons from overrunning ledges. Entire municipal departments exist to keep trees pruned away from power lines, or to spray for mosquitoes, or to keep ivy from cracking public buildings into rubble. The more you zoom out, the clearer it becomes. A huge share of modern economies is devoted to fending off life. There's a contradiction here worth reflecting on. Our culture loves to insist that nature is fragile, a porcelain Eden that might shatter under the slightest human pressure. Where does this mood come from? Why are so many people, especially young people in the West, terrified that humanity is destroying the planet beyond repair? Part of the answer is cultural. For at least 2 generations, we've been marinated in environmental alarm. Saturday morning cartoons like Captain Planet preached that every candy wrapper doomed the rainforest. Nature documentaries scored their shots of coral reefs and polar bears with the urgency of disaster films. In 2006, Al Gore's docudrama An Inconvenient Truth framed climate change as an imminent planetary collapse. Young activists today, like Greta Thunberg, repeat the same message with new countdowns. 12 years left, 5 years left. We're always just shy of apocalypse. When you grow up inside that fatalistic drumbeat, it becomes easy to see human beings as a plague upon the earth, and to see every ecological change as evidence of collapse. But history and ecology suggest something very different. The truth is almost the exact opposite. Nature is relentless. It's civilization that's fragile. Okay. To fend off anaphylactic reaction to these statements, I will happily state for the record that I'm not a climate change denialist. The data are the data. Global temperatures have risen markedly since the 19th century. Sea levels are rising. Atmospheric CO2 is up by roughly half. Those are the facts. What this episode wrestles with is what those facts mean. We are destabilizing the conditions we prefer, the climate we've adapted to, the coastlines we've settled, the forests and reefs we love for their amazing biodiversity. And it's certainly true that our actions have caused countless species to go extinct. That's tragic, no doubt about it. But the idea that nature itself is fragile is a very distorted interpretation of these facts. Life on this planet is ferocious. It seizes every opportunity, fills every gap, overruns every neglected edge. We can see this most clearly, not in abstract theory, but in history, in the many times human presence has retreated and nature has rushed back in. So, let's walk through a few case studies, chronologically. The ruins of Rome, the aftermath of the Black Death, the radiation zone of Chernobyl, the demilitarized zone in Korea, and finally, the abandoned neighborhoods of Detroit, Michigan. Together, they reveal the same story. When humans stop holding the line, life returns faster than most of us could imagine. The Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents. Its engineers cut roads, raised aqueducts, cleared forests, and bent rivers to their will. They paved and quarried and mined on a scale Europe would not see again for 1,000 years. And yet, when the Western Empire unraveled in the 5th century, nature surged back with startling speed. Contemporary observers noticed the change almost immediately. In Britain, where Rome had cleared forests for ships and fields, pollen records show that within a single generation, those landscapes were closing back in. Birch and oak, the pioneer species of Europe, colonized pastures that had been plowed for centuries. With farmers gone, villages thinned out, and the open countryside grew darker with forest year by year until it was hard to imagine that these places had ever been cleared. The infrastructure that had held the wilderness at bay collapsed with astonishing speed. Roman roads that had carried armies and traders across the empire depended on constant maintenance, drainage ditches cleared, stones relaid, ruts filled. Left untended, they failed in less than a decade, frost splitting the pavement, weeds and bramble rising through the cracks. Villas, whose tiled roofs required regular repair, caved in within 20 years. Once the roofs gave way, walls buckled, mosaics shattered, and ivy and saplings rooted themselves in the atriums. Even the aqueducts, marvels of Roman engineering, clogged with silt and reeds. The Pontine marshes south of Rome, once drained by a lattice of canals, reverted almost immediately. Malaria reappeared, discouraging repopulation. And with the return of forests and marshes came the return of animals that had been absent for centuries as well. Wolves prowled where forums had once bustled. Wild boar rooted in abandoned orchards. Chroniclers described former cities falling silent but for the cries of roaming predators and prey, as if the world itself had turned against humanity. In truth, what they were witnessing was not malevolence, but momentum, the natural world, tireless and opportunistic, reclaiming the land the moment Rome loosened its grip. What had taken centuries to build unraveled in a single lifetime. What's striking is not just the loss of grandeur, but the speed of erasure. Within a century of Rome's fall, whole regions of Western Europe became far more wild than they had been for nearly 1,000 years. Nature did not hesitate. The moment human vigilance slackened, it advanced. If Rome shows nature encroaching after political collapse, the Black Death shows what happens after demographic collapse. Between 1347 and 1353, bubonic plague swept Europe. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population died. In England alone, more than 1,000 villages were abandoned. Across the continent, fields went untilled, herds wandered feral, and forests surged. The shock was visible not just in chronicles, but in the land itself. Modern archaeologists digging in once thriving parishes often find house foundations abruptly capped by woodland soils. Stone walls disappear under roots within a generation. In France, vineyard terraces that had been worked for centuries were abandoned and swallowed by scrub. In Scandinavia, farms that had been hacked out of the forest reverted so quickly that within decades, returning settlers found themselves felling trees where their grandfathers had once planted rye. The historian William Cronon, though writing about colonial New England in his book Changes in the Land, highlights a principle that applies here too. When human pressure recedes, natural succession accelerates. Pasture turns to brush, brush to saplings, saplings to forest in surprisingly little time. In medieval Europe, when labor shortages made it impossible to keep landscapes cleared, reforestation was measured not in centuries, but in decades. Once again, pollen records confirm the speed. Core samples from European soils show a sharp spike in tree pollen in the decades after the plague. What peasants and lords had cleared over centuries, disease allowed the forest to reclaim in a couple of decades. The same pattern played out. Wolves and bears once again expanded their ranges. Wetlands once again reappeared where drainage ditches failed, and fish returned to streams no longer muddied by livestock. Even the global climate seems to have registered the shock. Scientists argue that the reforestation of Europe after the Black Death was so vast that it pulled measurable amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, contributing to the so-called Little Ice Age of the 15th century. Think about that. Human civilization faltered, and nature didn't just creep back in slowly. It roared back so loudly that it shifted the global climate. The modern era features no exception to this rule. It's not as though we've somehow overwhelmed life's power simply by broadening our footprint on this planet in more recent centuries. So, the plague showed us what happened when medieval farmers abandoned their fields, and in the late 20th century, we see what happened when industrial modernity retreats in spaces like Chernobyl. For humans, the Chernobyl disaster was catastrophic. In April 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the Soviet city of Pripyat in the northern part of modern-day Ukraine exploded during a late-night safety test gone wrong. A massive release of radioactive material swept across Ukraine, Belarus, and much of Europe. The Soviet government evacuated more than 100,000 people from the surrounding zone, leaving entire towns frozen in time. Radiation caused acute sickness in plant workers and firefighters, raised long-term cancer risks across the region, and etched Chernobyl into the global vocabulary as a shorthand for technological catastrophe. But for non-human life, the sudden absence of people opened the door. In the nearly 40 years since, the Chernobyl exclusion zone has become one of Europe's richest wildlife reserves. Wolves, lynx, boar, moose, bison, species that had been marginalized by farming and settlement surged back. Birds nest on abandoned transmission towers. Beavers dam rivers once dredged for cooling canals. Radiation hotspots remain dangerous. Some animals suffer mutations and shortened lifespans. But the overall picture is startling. An irradiated landscape with no people sustains more life than a fertile landscape full of people ever did. This is not to minimize the human cost, but it underscores the point. Nature is not fragile. Life is amazingly opportunistic. Remove human pressure, and even in the shadow of radiation, it multiplies. We can go even further with these startling modern case studies. The Korean Demilitarized Zone, for example, stretches 160 miles across the Korean peninsula, roughly 2.5 miles wide, bristling with barbed wire and watchtowers. For 70 years, it has been off limits to any human settlement. The result? One of the most biodiverse corridors in East Asia. Migratory cranes use the demilitarized zone as a stopover. Asiatic black bears roam its forests. Endangered leopards and musk deer find refuge in valleys once cultivated as rice paddies. Botanists have cataloged hundreds of rare plant species thriving in what was once farmland. It's a bitter irony. The same hostility that divides two nations has accidentally created a sanctuary for non-human life. The lesson is consistent. Wherever people withdraw, life advances. Even landscapes scarred by war regenerate quickly when we step aside. Let's look closer to home. Detroit, Michigan, once the industrial hub of America, lost more than half its population in the second half of the 20th century. Between 1950 and 2020, over 1 million residents left. Factories shuttered, houses emptied, the tax base evaporated. By the early 2000s, estimates suggest that more than 40 square miles of the city were vacant, an area the size of San Francisco hollowed out inside Detroit's borders. At first, many of those spaces became dumping grounds, littered with broken furniture, stripped cars, and graffiti. But nature was impervious to the urban blight. Within a handful of years, the dumps turned green. Weeds pushed through every crack in driveways and sidewalks. Goldenrod, milkweed, and sumac colonized abandoned lots. Saplings, cottonwood, maple, oak, thrust up through collapsed roofs. Ornamental plants left behind by homeowners, like lilac and rose bushes, spread feral. Wildlife followed suit. Biologists now record foxes and coyotes in the urban core, species once confined to rural Michigan. Pheasants strut across vacant blocks. Owls hunt in neighborhoods that haven't seen electricity in decades. One survey even documented bald eagles nesting along the Detroit River, a symbol of national strength perched over a city synonymous with decline. The pace of the wilderness's return is what shocks observers. Within a single generation, whole neighborhoods look less like ruins and more like prairies or young forests. Ecologists studying these lots describe them as accidental woodlands, early stages of the same succession that overtook Europe after the Black Death. A vacant lot left untended moves from weeds to brush to saplings within 1 decade. Multiply that across tens of thousands of parcels, and the effect is breathtaking. Community groups have harnessed this succession, carving urban gardens, orchards, and even small farms out of the vacancy. Detroit today grows hundreds of tons of food annually inside city limits. But that's a relatively small part of what's going on. Much of the regrowth is spontaneous, indifferent to human intent. And it's a reminder that even in a place we imagine as the epitome of industrial ruin, nature does not hesitate. What these stories reveal is that our culture's obsession with the idea that nature is on the brink of collapse and that human beings are the plague driving its demise is entirely delusional. History shows that every time people give up the fight against the encroachment of nature, even for a very short time, life proves to be the complete opposite. It remains just as aggressive, opportunistic, and relentless as it's ever been on this planet. A major cause of modern society's delusion that nature is so fragile is a pervasive ignorance about the basic biophysics of our planet. Earth is uniquely hospitable, bathed in abundant sunlight, wrapped in a protective atmosphere, watered by oceans, and seasoned by geologic cycles that recycle nutrients. Earth is primed for life. Photosynthesis turns carbon into sugar with astonishing efficiency. Every spring, you can watch whole continents blush green in satellite images. Compared to humanity's minuscule modern influence, nature's enduring reign on this planet is awe-inspiring. Life has had 4 billion years to diversify strategies for survival. Extremophiles endure radiation, pressure, heat, and cold that would kill us instantly. Microbes thrive miles beneath the Earth's surface, living off faint chemical gradients. Seeds lie dormant for decades, waiting for a patch of sunlight. Spores drift invisibly, colonizing any damp corner we fail to bleach. And life on this planet is also shockingly redundant. If one species falters, another often fills the niche. Fires burn a forest, but the ash fertilizes regrowth. Floods scour a plain, but silt enriches new soils. The Canadian ecologist C.S. Holling, in a landmark 1973 paper titled Resilience and Stability of Ecological Systems, gave us a vocabulary for this vitality. Before Holling, most ecologists assumed that ecosystems behaved like machines, wobbling perhaps, but always tending back toward balance. Holling argued the opposite. He distinguished between engineering resilience, the ability to snap back to a prior state, and ecological resilience, the ability of a natural system to absorb disturbance, reorganize, and then keep functioning even if it doesn't return to the old equilibrium. In his famous adaptive cycle theory, ecosystems move through phases of growth, conservation, collapse, and renewal. Disturbance isn't an error in the ecological system. It's one of its ordinary phases. That insight explains why humanity's efforts to artificially preserve and maintain specific landscapes often backfire. A forest that is artificially prevented from ever burning accumulates fuel until it erupts into a catastrophic blaze. A river locked in levees loses the floodplain fertility that made it abundant in the first place. A grassland kept free of grazing or fire flips into scrub. Holling showed that what looks like stability to us is often brittleness in disguise. Natural systems endure not by resisting change, but by passing through it. Holling's work reveals a fundamental reason why the modern fragility myth is misleading. Nature doesn't require stability. Civilization does. We require the stability of crops, of seasons, of pest mitigation. Life doesn't need any of that. Life finds a way, often in forms we can't predict, precisely because disturbance and renewal are built into its operating system. That's what powers evolution. The idea that we must protect the planet has never really been much of a scientific claim. It's more of a luxury belief. It's the belief of a people so far removed from any semblance of a struggle to survive against the raw tenacity of nature that they develop the audacity to imagine themselves as its destroyers. It's the indulgence of a society where the rivers are dammed, the weeds are sprayed, the pests are trapped, the gutters are cleared by someone else, always by someone else, and so the vigilance that keeps civilization standing is invisible. Now, we should be clear. Humanity is absolutely capable of changing this planet. We can scorch forests, drain rivers, collapse fisheries, bleach corals, and destabilize the climate. Our industrial activity is absolutely changing the chemistry of the atmosphere and the oceans in unprecedented ways. And this may make our particular way of life harder, even unbearable in places. But none of this will make the Earth itself fragile. None of this will make life on this planet any less tenacious. Life will dodge and weave around whatever we throw at it. As George Carlin quipped, ultimately, the Earth will shake us off like a bad case of fleas. I'd also like to emphasize that life on this planet is not only resilient, it is astonishingly beautiful. So far as we know, life exists nowhere else in the universe. It probably does, scattered across distant galaxies, but here on Earth, life has flourished as a living mosaic of elegance and wonder. Many of the creatures we share this planet with are not hostile, but gentle, benign, even sublime. Coral reefs that look like cities of stained glass, birds that lace the sky with song, forests that perfume the air with spring. It could have been otherwise. Life might have evolved here as nothing but poisonous thorns and predators. Instead, it has given us a home of staggering diversity and grace. That, in and of itself, is worthy of reverence. So, when we talk about protecting the environment, let's speak honestly. We're not saving the planet. The planet has endured worse shocks than anything we can deliver, and life has always returned. What we're trying to preserve is this beautiful arrangement of life, one that nourishes us. The coastlines we build on, the crops we depend on, the forests and reefs and rivers that have shaped our civilization. It is not fragility that makes our fellow species precious. It is their particularity. They are not eternal, and when we disrupt them, we diminish not the earth, but ourselves. Because, in the end, we are not separate from life. We are a part of it. Human beings are one more expression of the same fierce vitality that drives vines up fences and wolves back into new forests. We evolved within this system, and we remain bound to it. And like every other organism, we are tenacious too. We are opportunistic, and we are vulnerable. Our task is not to imagine ourselves as nature's overlord or as its executioner, but to recognize that we are just one of its many forms that will dodge and weave and adapt to fill whatever spaces we can, along with all of the other organisms doing the same, in a system that's never been fragile, but will nonetheless always be sacred. We don't have to whip ourselves into a panic to respect that, or to do right by it. I'm Brad Harris. So long.